So the other day I was doing a live stream and my video cut out and I wasn't able to finish my Bible study or my presentation on rapture passages. And I had actually started out with passages that people use to support basically a pre-tribulation rapture that are not rapture passages. And I understand people's zeal for wanting to support this doctrine, and I actually believe that believers are going to be taken before the seals are opened, before the trumpets are blown, and all of that. So I'm not opposed to rapture. In fact, I believe that there are, according to what I read in Revelation, there are actually three different groups of sons, believers, kings and priests, people who are going to rule and reign with Christ. Three different groups that are shown in the book of Revelation who will be taken, who will be raptured. So I'm not opposed to rapture as a concept. What I'm wanting to address today, though, are passages that people use to support the rapture just because they're not familiar with what's going on in Revelation. They don't know that there's already a lot of support for this, and so they're kind of grasping at straws, using traditions like the whole Galilean wedding tradition and all of that. That actually gets shoved into so much eschatology that's out there, and yet that is not at all the story of Revelation. It's not at all the story. So what I want to do is just briefly go over a few passages that are not rapture passages. And I want you to understand there's actually something much bigger, much better going on in these passages than you could imagine. So the first passage that I want to look at here is John 14, 1 and 2. And this is actually what sort of was the impetus for me doing this video series, because I was listening to a pastor who does a lot of end time prophecy teaching, and he was using John 14, 1 and 2 as a rapture passage. It most definitely is not a rapture passage. So John 14 is a part of what's called the upper room discourse. This is Jesus talking to his disciples. John 13 through basically 17 is this upper room discourse, and then this prayer that Jesus prays for his disciples. So John 14, 1 and 2 is a very reassuring, and it's a wonderful passage. It is being spoken to his disciples, and by application, of course, it probably applies to us as well. But let's look at what it says here. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. The disciples didn't really understand that Jesus was going to die on a cross. They just didn't get it. It was all very foreign to them, even though Jesus had told them many times in the past that this was going to happen. They just had a mental block about this. And Jesus was trying to bring them to a place of faith. Okay, and that's the gist of that whole upper room discourse in the Gospel of John, is to bring the apostles to a place of faith. And finally, they get there. Oh, we believe that you came from God. And that's all that Jesus was wanting from them. They didn't need to believe that he died and rose from the dead or anything like that, because that hadn't happened yet. What they needed was to have the faith to believe that Jesus was sent from God and that Jesus spoke the words of God. All right, so now Jesus is reassuring them and telling them not to be troubled and to believe in God and believe in him. And then he says, in my Father's house are many rooms. Okay, in God's house, there are many rooms. There is plenty of space. Okay, plenty of space. And he says, if it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? Now, this is where it gets a little weird. If you listen to most dispensational Bible teachers, they will say that, oh, this is a wedding thing. This is where Jesus is basically betrothing the church to himself and these apostles, and going to drink that cup of betrothal, and then he's going to leave and he's going to add on to his Father's house, and then he's going to come back like a thief in the night and pick up these people and bring them into heaven. They're the bride and he's the bridegroom, and he's going to take them into heaven. Okay, and that is the story that is applied to this. Okay, and it is incorrect. Okay, it's incorrect. It's not in the context of who the apostles were. It doesn't, it's not about what the apostles wanted, what Jesus' disciples wanted, what they were hoping for. And okay, they weren't hoping to be a bride who would be, caught up into heaven. Okay, which is what the rapture is about. It's about people being caught up into heaven, snatched away into heaven, like Elijah and like Enoch. That word never occurs here. There's nothing about people being snatched away here. There is something about people, these disciples, being with Jesus, okay? But you can't extrapolate from that to a rapture, okay? What is it that the disciples wanted? What is it that they were always arguing about? They were always arguing about who was the greatest, who would have a position at Jesus' right hand or at Jesus' left hand. In fact, James and John's mother came to Jesus and said, would it be okay if Jimmy sat here and Johnny sat there at your right and left hand when you come into your kingdom? Okay, they wanted a position. Okay, so what Jesus is saying in this passage here is that in God's home, okay, in his household, plenty of room. Okay, Jesus does not need to add on to God's house. There's plenty of room there. The problem is that in our understanding of how, of rooms and mansions and positions and places, we don't understand what Jesus was talking about at that time. If you were part of a king's household, you lived there and you had a position there. You had employment there. Right? So if you're a steward who takes care of the accounts or finances, not only did you work there, you lived there. Your position had a place and your place had a position. Okay, they're connected. So what Jesus is telling the disciples here is, look, I'm going there to make sure that you have a job description, that you have a position there, that you have a place in my Father's house. And it's not just about having, the guest room or something, or living in a fancy mansion. It's about having a job that you're going to be assigned to do. It's about having a position. So this is what the disciples were interested in. They could care less. If someone had said, hey, disciples, you're the bride, and I'm going to come like a bridegroom and snatch you at a time nobody knows and bring you up to my Father's house, which already has plenty of room, but I'm going to make an add-on for you, they wouldn't have known what you're talking about, because that isn't what they were interested in. In fact, that whole concept of that bridal stuff that's superimposed on this passage borders on ridiculous. It borders on ridiculous. That isn't what the disciples wanted. There is no indication that they wanted to be Jesus' bride. There's no indication at all. Zero. But they did want to have a position in the kingdom, and that's what that passage is all about. So John 14, 1 and 2, you can scratch that off your list of rapture passages. You can put it on your list of passages that talk about believers having a position in God's kingdom. So I'm keeping this one short and sweet. Just going to let you know I do have a book, Convergence, where I talk about end times. It's in Portuguese, it's also in French, and it's on Amazon, audio, Kindle, and paperback. In the next video, we're going to talk about another passage that is not a rapture passage. So till then, I pray you have a very, very blessed day.